online learning exchange, really in response to how we're trying to think about other ways to be useful in this era right now. It seems like that we're entering of social distancing in a post COVID-19 world. And so I'm Chris Janson. I'm the director of the Center for Urban Education and Policy at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, Florida. We are now broadcasting out of our respective homes. And I say our because I'm joined here with one of my close friends and colleagues, Sophie Filibert. So yesterday, Sophie and I were having some conversations about, what we can do from our purviews and our backgrounds. A little bit about me. I'm so I'm the director of this center, but I'm also a counselor educator who studies and writes about and teaches around ideas for collective leadership and how communities can come together in a cross-generational way to strengthen themselves, the organizations that help support them and that we live through, including schools, and then also the communities in which we live. And Sophie, I'll let you describe your kind of bona fides. Thanks, Sophie. So, one of the I'm sure one of the things that you're experiencing, I know one of the things that we're experiencing and is really the focus of our conversation yesterday and today is what it's like in the kind of human cost, the emotional impact of living with this much uncertainty. So we've compared notes frequently, I think, throughout our lives about how we've been able to manage different things that we've experienced in our lives. But Sophie, it strikes me that one of the things that in our effort, of course, to as workplaces, as communities, from our federal, state, and local government responses, I think the focus has understandably really been on um, some real procedural things. The distance that we have to stay away from people, recommendations in terms of how we are in contact or not in contact with our elders. But there has not yet, I think, been a lot of opportunity for all of us to really talk about what happens emotionally to us when we are, really living with unparalleled uncertainty in our lives. So, what are some thoughts that you have been considering or that you think are useful for parents? So if I have two teenagers, as you know, and so I think about, like, how am I having conversations with them? You're working quite frequently with secondary students, so what are some things that you think would be useful for family members who are older in a family? What are some useful things that they might be able to or should be talking to their kids about? So when you mention when you talk about the importance of really coming at it from the standpoint of empathy, there were some specific things that I heard you say that and a person who's mentoring a younger person or a older family member could do. One is to self-disclose, to say yourself, this is how I'm feeling, and it's not, it's a natural thing to be feeling anxiety right now. Was that one of the things that you just said? And and the other thing, another part of that I heard with you was that it's important to sometimes to name emotions to help people, our younger people in our lives, like actually surface the feelings that they're experiencing. It's not, I think that speaking as as a dad, it's not a common thing, unless I'm real intentional about it, to invite my sons to describe how they're feeling. It doesn't. It's not something that unfortunately happens naturally enough. What would be some techniques or some things that you found that are helpful in terms of helping create space for a teenager, for example, to talk about their emotions in terms of what they're experiencing now? Yeah. So the idea of mindfulness, I think, is something that a lot of people talk about, right? They speak about, they suggest would be a helpful, useful thing. Um, what would be some everyday opportunities to interject mindfulness really into our houses now that we're kind of locked down? So by the way, the right now in Jacksonville, if you're watching from another part of the country, there's a heavy suggestion on the social distancing that you probably heard about. We are not at this point supposed to shelter in place, so that we have not yet hit that stage. However, both Dr. Filibert and I, Sophie Filibert and I, work at University of North Florida, and all learning for the remainder of this semester minimally has been moved online. So we're speaking, I think, from our respective homes right now. But in our homes, when we're not maybe always used to being around each other, with your roommates or your partners or your family members. So what are some everyday ways that we can interject mindfulness into the rhythm of, I guess, these new rhythms we're trying to figure out for ourselves? I think
news junkie, which I tend to be sometime when these things, when big things happen. And so maybe just giving yourself permission to have a pause and to say that I'll get back to, the cares of this world, but just give myself 5 minutes to pause and just having maybe a time of silence, just, without the TV or without your phone. And that is a very quick and practical. You can do that almost anywhere unless you're driving. So if you're doing it while you're driving, but if you're at home, which most of us are going to be, then maybe just pausing on the technology for a few minutes. Uh, Calling people. I think that it's important that we had, with the mandate to self isolate, to self shelter, that we may sort of forget one of the basics of just calling and hearing a human voice. I think that could be comforting. So you know of people in your life that are maybe at, even if they're not in a vulnerable group, but if they're by themselves, give them a call. The human voice can be very maybe comforting, even if they're still showing anxiety. But calling people, picking up the phone, text messaging is good. Social media is helpful. We're using it, but also just picking up the phone call and calling people, checking on your neighbors if you have their number. So I think having some human interaction, that's going to be a reminder of us sort of being in this together. And it's something that's that's affecting us on a human level, and it's not some academic or abstract thing that we're seeing on the news. So I think that's going to be helpful to listening to what others how they're experiencing it. So to put your energy or your efforts on your own anxiety about it, that can help.
Yeah. So, one of the things I know that like younger people in our lives wouldn't likely have this frame of reference. Like earlier today, I was talking to the young woman who is the community arts curator and coordinator for our center. Michaela is 19, and so she had just maybe been born when 9/11 occurred. And in our conversation, was about how we can think differently, or need to really think differently about our own gifts in a time like this. That maybe the old ways of I think we probably, many of us have recognized that our organizations and our even national leaders are trying to approach this issue and this challenge from a playbook that just maybe is no longer relevant. And so in the case of Michaela, for example, she's an artist. And, what better time for her brilliance and her creativity and ability to synthesize information and pull it together. Our conversation was about how this may require a recentering, so she had been preparing for a physical art show the next art show in our space. And of course, that's not going to be happening. So, she's trying to think through how she can challenge herself. I think that maybe there's another part then, is that I would like to think that was a helpful conversation from her standpoint. I know it was for me. I was trying to be very conscious in the moment about offering some perspective related to how I remembered feeling when I was a little bit closer in age to her when 9/11 took place. But when there is an unprecedented event for people who are younger, what are some ways to get at that conversation?
That's a very good point. I'm thinking, because I don't have children or young people, but in my space immediately. But and I haven't had the chance within the last week to even, have contact with young people to even have that conversation. But in my mind, I like the idea of having creative outlets. We do bibliotherapy, as counseling, so journaling, finding ways that they can sort of create out of this chaos. That's very helpful if they're, that way. And it could be very many ways to be creative, whether it's writing, drawing, cooking. That's a creative process. And so, but in terms of talking to kids and processing that, really sort of focusing on the feelings and helping them to identify what they're feeling and what possible, that they may be expressing, and just sort of, being present with them. But it would definitely be depend on the developmental age too. So if they're, if they're really young and not really as verbally expressive, if they're older, maybe first year college students. And so definitely exploring, what are some of the things that you're thinking about, and sort of being guided by what they're presenting, and helping them clarify what they're experiencing and how this sort of is impacting and helping them make meaning of what's happening with them. So.
Yeah. So we know that here in Duval, it looks like the teachers will be meeting in some kind of format, whether online or in person, to receive instruction in terms of how they can support online learning. I mean, this is going to be nationwide, but this is our community, so it's a microcosm. I mean, what a heavy lift to rapidly shift learning to an online platform that just hasn't been used by millions of people. That's what it's going to be coming down to very soon. One concern that I have, and I've seen other people express this, even on Facebook, like earlier today, that when that learning resumes, and it's going to be virtual, it's going to be online. I really hope that there's an emphasis on helping students, helping young people kind of deal with the affective part of this, the emotional part of this. So what are some of your thoughts? I know this is new for all of us, so we're all kind of figuring things out and building the bicycle as we're trying to ride it. But what would be some suggestions for maybe a teacher who's anxious about an online teaching format anyway, and now all of a sudden they may be in front of students as early as next week um, in a platform like this? What would be your recommendation or your thoughts? I guess recommendations is a heavy word, but your thoughts in terms of how to address and at least invoke the fact that we're experiencing collective trauma.
Well, for an educator who is going to have to, explore that in this really way that's been thrusted on us, I one way I would imagine is just that reaching out to others who are doing it, who have done it. I mean, I've had to do that personally as a professor. That I've had to reach out to my colleagues and sort of get their feel on it. Those who are doing the very similar work that I'm doing. This is when we need community. That community doesn't have to necessarily be locally, in my block, but that community can be, over the phone and a distance away. But looking to see what others are doing. There are resources that our organizations are providing to us to support that transition. So being very vigilant about that, reading up on those resources and taking advantage of those resources too. And so there are a lot of online stuff that we're being given. And so use that, call the help desk, have someone have someone walk you through if you have to. But it is a shift though. A lot of us who are more in the face-to-face, I mean, if you're in the social services, if you're in in a profession that has leaned heavily on face-to-face, this is going to be a giant learning curve. And so maybe reframing the opportunity that you have, that you're learning a new skill now. And I think that is going to be helpful to relieve anxiety because you're doing something proactive for a solution. So I think being proactive about it and looking at it as a chance to learn and being supported in that way by your organization. And so it's something that's not ideal, but we have to do it, So I think reframing the mindset about, wow, I have to do this. Well, it's something that you're going to learn. It's a skill that will carry you beyond this crisis too. So reaching out, figure out who your community is, maybe getting some new people into your community that will help support that shift. And even the students, though, our students, at least for our age group that we work with, they're really savvy about the digital landscape. And so I've had to rely a lot on my students who have really been instrumental in sort of giving me the whereabouts about how to do this. So I'm learning from my students as well, who are being really constructive with me. And just, showing that, I don't know it all, but we're going to learn together. And it's been really helpful too. And so we're only better off because of it. So I think figure out your community, reaching out, being vulnerable enough to say that I don't quite get this, but I want to get it, And that mindset's going to be very helpful. Going about it in a sense of humility. We've heard that a few times recently. And so this is really humbling for us as a global community. And so I think keeping that mindset and having what we call in our profession growth mindset, right? And so keeping a growth mindset about that and looking at it as an opportunity and not as a disadvantage or something that you have to do, which you have to do anyway. So I think the mindset and being conscious about that is going to be important.
Yeah, Sophie, a couple of things that you just said were really resonated with me. One, I know that because we've spent so much time teaching together over the years, you and I, that I know that we share a commitment and a value for being in the learning space as a teacher. Like we're teachers and we're learners, and boy, was that like apparent today with technology. Just with this, in fact, I think probably the first couple 3, 4, 5 minutes it was just my face up here until I figured out how to get yours up too. But who better to teach us? I mean, how better to decenter that relationship with your students where you don't have to always be the expert when clearly they're going to know more about operating the technology. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciated hearing that. And then general, I think it needs to be said that we need to be easy with each other and on each other. I mean, we have to be, I think, even more tolerant and gracious with each other's emotions and insecurities and challenges. I'm not sure if you can see this, but one of our good friends and an amazing advocate for our communities and the youth and the in it and the teachers that support them, Myra Martello, brought up a really great point. I'll read it if it can't be seen there.
Yeah, I see it.
You can see it, yeah. So I think that comment that there are many children whose only safe, loving space is their school. What happens now? How can teachers support them? And she followed up by wondering if teachers who know them could connect them personally with resources. I imagine that's what that comment means, or connecting personally with them. Like, and I think that's an incredible point for us all to consider as we're migrating toward online platforms. You know, how do you create a sense of intimacy in something that I associate as being just an impersonal tool?
Well, that's a great point too. This
Thanks,
is this is we are not in an opportune time to actually call home. Like this is like not that we're going to work less. But people are assuming that we're going to work less by being online, but we're working harder. But I agree with Mara that that we can. One way I can think of immediately when I saw the comment was I can take a time and spend it and call all my parents, have a 5-minute call with my parents, check in on them. And if you're a secondary teacher, you may have several classes. If you're a primary teacher, elementary, then that would be one set of class. That's doable. You can do it. Commit a day or two where you're going to just call parents to check up on them, see what's happening, to see if they have gotten the updates about the lunches for school. I mean, our county is giving free lunches to all schools. And so just seeing that, I'm calling to make sure that you know about the updates and what's happening. That could be a 5-minute conversation you have with your parents. And that's a very practical way to communicate and to know that we hear you, we're in it together, we know what's happening. And so we want to make sure that person that you're okay. So that's a great idea, Dr. Martello, So that's one way I think about doing that. If you have their numbers, text them, But I personally like the phone, the human voice, And I think that the parents would be really, I think we appreciate that now, to see that behind all the updates and the information overload, that we have human beings that are actually, helping to take care of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Just thinking about Dylan and Jack. So my sons are 18 and one's soon to be 16. So their anxieties are different. Like Jack's is obvious because he's not at a transition point. Dylan's going to be graduating, however that works out this semester. So he's still in the midst of college admissions. He's concerned about, frankly, whether wherever he ends up going, whether he'll be able to start there physically in the fall. He's somebody who's decided and has a lot of clarity about what he wants to do for a career. He wants to jump into it. He doesn't want to wait for a virus to be eradicated. Whereas Jack, I mean, he is a little relieved, frankly, because he's in a performance arts school, and his arts area is choir. It's choral performance. I mean, so singing in close proximity to 50 other people on a daily basis it would be a scary thing if there was still physical meetings in school. Mm-hmm. So, the other thing that Myra's comment really makes me even more kind of, I'm going to be even more committed around is helping find resources for parents. I mean, we're already seeing like social media, like memes and jokes about what a trial it has been already for some to unexpectedly be home with their kids instead of at work. And this could stretch out for many months, maybe a year. And so I know that for me personally, when in my past, in our family's past, when we've dealt with the most stress, how absolutely invaluable it was to be able to pick up a phone and talk to you. Or I think about like a good friend of mine who at probably my most difficult moment as a father, it was very healing and helpful to be able to just have another person listen. And we might be sheltering in place, We are certainly practicing social distancing, but how do we not isolate ourselves socially? So our physical proximity has to be limited. But what would be some other things that you would suggest to families right now in terms of kind of dealing with this trauma that accompanies an unprecedented event?
I mean, the things that you've mentioned already, and it could vary from family to family. Culturally, what are some cultural, aspects to that too. Um, and I'm thinking just, I mean, it's really a time to pause. We're being forced to pause. And I think we have a lot of discomfort with the pause in our generation that we're not used to having that, even for those who are being asked to stay home and they might want to stay home already, but we're like, what do we do with ourselves? So sort of having to reinvent and reimagine how do we spend our time together. And that may vary from family to family. But that's going to be the challenge that we have is to figure out how we, without going cabin, having cabin fever. But this is something that we're told that to expect for the long haul. And so we have to, we're going to have to be getting creative about how we, how we value our time together and what community really means for us at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and I guess we don't know what the actual structure and process will look like for these different as different school districts and schools migrate to online learning out of necessity. But I think one of the mantras I know that we have talked a lot, you and I, about teaching. So now all of a sudden there's all kinds of people who are put in a position to be teachers that they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And the idea that I know you and I both embrace, that you don't need an excessively traditional structure, but it's very useful to have a structure. Like the more people can, in a time of uncertainty, know on smaller levels that we know what's around the corner. So I could see it being very useful. I've seen some examples of this again online already, where people are structuring just basically a calendar or an agenda, guidelines for what they're going to do with different chunks of time. 9 to 12, we're focused on reading together as a family, and then from 11 to 12, we're getting some exercise wherever possible. So that idea of structure, I think, is important. I think you can hide behind structure. Like we talk about that too. Sometimes you can fill up an agenda so full that really it represents maybe a means or an attempt to move away from deeper conversations. And I think that, well, maybe talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think that the idea of I keep on thinking about Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, and how one of the things that really sticks with me there and was reinforced recently when our friend and colleague Jim Garrett was here doing workshops around difficult knowledge, is that idea that at the core we are aware to greater or lesser degrees of how vulnerable we are in this world. Some of us more than others, because of different circumstances, because of who you are. Me as a white man being far less vulnerable than you as a Haitian woman. But at a time like this, we are smacked in the face with an immediate reminder of how impermanent our lives are and how vulnerable we are to things that we just can't control. And that's a heavy conversation, but I think I know it's in the subtext. It's almost conscious. It's right underneath the surface, but it's also the thing we try to avoid the most. What do you see as the value, or is there a value in just going there?
Well, I'm thinking that a lot of people may not be able to go there like in the ways that you and I might do as academics. And so I'm thinking of the parent, like, there are ways to address it maybe indirectly. But I think that that we're experiencing it. We probably don't even know how to even name it. And so sometimes giving language to it is helpful. But in terms of like parents and, school-age children, um, I don't know. Maybe just staying present with them, and I don't really know. I haven't thought about that too. I mean, because we talk about it, but never in this. And there are some one or two I don't know, Chris, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it because we do, go there, but it's not often that I can have that conversation with a lot of parents and kids.
Yeah.
That consciousness.
I mean, I was thinking about how I've been thinking a lot about what we do, what I do, what do I do when I'm not aware, when I'm not really being kind of self-aware. What are my inclinations for dealing with the anxiety of the uncertainty at hand, or the anxiety associated with a heightened awareness of my own vulnerability? I think I saw this in real clear terms from Dylan about a week ago when he so it was shortly after this was all going down, and he walked into the room and he's like, I can't stop looking at Twitter. Like, I cannot. So, as we had a conversation about that, I asked him, what is it mostly that you're feeling like you need a constant update around? What is it, and what would you want to learn? What could put aside that anxiety? And he said, I'm not sure. I feel uncomfortable about whether, this is a student's point of view, the school district is going to make the right decision to ensure our safety in terms of going back and meeting physically. Of course, at that point, we started learning about athletes who have got so. We had a long conversation about that. Eventually we came around to an idea and also a commitment that, but it was also an attempt to remove that uncertainty, and we resolved that we didn't have to be anxious about what the district was going to decide. That ultimately the decision about whether he is safe enough to go to school, or any kid is, that's our decision. So I think sometimes we are in a strange place right now where we've been conditioned for a long time to wait for other people to make really big decisions. But now those big decisions seem much bigger because there's this omnipresent threat that's as the president would like to say is unseen. But it's also what also is unseen is the way we're responding to the trauma involved in it. So for you, I guess on a personal level, what are some things that you recognize that help you recognize, like, okay, I'm reflexively coping with this anxiety rather than consciously dealing with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel Dylan. I have a similar, reaction. I've had similar experiences in that my, relying so much on the news and what's going on, on my phone. But before that, can I step back? One of the questions you asked about how would I be able to address that with the parent or children? But we make that question that has an assumption that the adult or the education leader, admin, whatever, has that consciousness with themselves to sort of be that they're recognizing that in themselves. If you don't see that happening and recognizing yourself, is it really possible to sort of help somebody else? If I'm here, wrapped up in my own anxiety, and I'm really, having either a response to be despondency or overreacting, or however you are acting, you're not really conscious about what your source is. Am I able to help somebody else who I'm supposed to be leading and who's under my care to go to that place? I don't think that's possible. Or if it happens, it may be, miraculous. But I don't think that we're fortunate enough to be somewhat conscious of that, because we have to prepare counselors, and so we have this language and we use it all the time. But for the average person, though, if they're not thinking about it in those terms, is it possible to then sort of say that I can sort of help my my sibling or my young person to be aware of that if I myself am not aware of how that's acting out in me? I don't know if that's actually possible. And when we see that, we see like these responses that that seem sort of mismatched for what we're going through. So I think my point is that there's a need for self-reflection that we have not maybe been accustomed to as a generation, maybe, or culture, maybe, or an environment. And if that were happening, that it would be easier, or maybe much more, much more, I don't know, doable, that we can actually have that conversation with someone else too. So that's where I see the gap is. I see as we do have a lot of information being thrown at us, but I see it less as an information gap, but more of a relationship gap. And so that relationship with yourself and then with,
Mm.
others around you, I think that would be a vehicle for that kind of conversation can happen more likely, And so, but I see that where our deficiencies lie, and with that, that we have to really sort of figure this out really quickly. And so that's what we're making some assumption that, a lot of people are thinking about it like we are, and that's not the case at all. And we see that.
Maybe even more of a case for mindfulness, for the adults and the older, the people in the home, the elders, to be able to step back and become more aware of what we're experiencing, to be able to self-regulate our own emotions, because I think that is an important thing. I think we're both pretty emotional people, but I think we're also pretty pretty committed to understanding that there are certain people that you show certain parts of emotions to at different times, and then in other times you have to self-regulate differently and put out a certain kind of energy, um, to support and nurture other people's sense of security.
And part of that too, though, when you think about our responses, like we have the range of responses to this crisis. Some are being despondent, not really responsive. Some are just sort of like putting on blinders. Some are sort of, putting out fires, and just the other extreme of it. And I think a part of it is like telling yourself, what benefit am I receiving from this? What is it? How is it soothing me? A lot of it's sort of like self-soothing in many ways. And so the action is important. We have to be responsive. We're being forced to be responsive. There's no way about it. It's life or death, literally. And so with that, it's like this delicate balance about being responsive and yet having some, I don't know, I don't even know what to call it, some clarity or peace of mind about what is it I'm doing and why am I doing this. And so I think that pause is going to be critical for us.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things I know that we as a family are trying to figure out. I mean, so our situation is, nobody's left the house since I left Sunday morning. I tried to get some groceries Sunday morning. And so what's that? 4 solid days. And I'm already starting to recognize some things. Like, if I'm not careful, I mean, right now, hopefully we have more opportunities to buy the things that we want, but, and I think for the most part we do, but there's something about being in the house all the time. I'm so tempted to graze on food. Like, I find myself eating when I'm not hungry. And that's something that just wouldn't happen during the workday if I was in the office. We just don't have a lot of that around. It's just there. It's coffee. It's hard, I would imagine, for many people to get any kind of exercise in.
Yeah.
I'm happy it's warmed up a little bit earlier in Florida than in previous years. So like we've been able to swim. But we're also trying to commit ourselves to walking our dogs, partially for the dogs, but also it's been cool just to see people in the neighborhood. We haven't seen a lot, but we've kind of yelled and greeted each other at a healthy distance. It's like Dylan, it's been tough for me to peel away from Twitter, and so I know I have to model that better. What are some things that people can do to help themselves see, and then some of these patterns that are developing, like as a counselor, what are some things that you might suggest that can help people, like you said, be more aware of what they're experiencing and emoting and feeling in order to be better supports for young people?
One thing I'm thinking that if you have, other people in your space, having them to check on you, sort of give them permission to say, can you check on me? If you know me, well enough, depending on how well they know you. But I think giving people permission to challenge you and to put you on check for your own benefit and for each other's benefit. That's going to be something. And if you don't have anybody in your physical space, having that call and sort of talking it through and saying that what do you notice about me, and what, just having check-in and having people give you, some insight into your blind spots, um, that's an immediate way I'm thinking with parenting children. If they're not old enough to sort of have that, have that verbal ability, then having another adult, be a part of that conversation for you as a parent.
Yeah. I mean, I think for younger kids, I think the importance of giving and trying to I guess so many things can be used for creative purposes, but I think one thing I always try to keep in mind when I talk with parents and families of younger children is that play is how young people how young children communicate. So I think it's as much as it's um, real demanding times where we feel like we have to be glued to the news on the television or the Twitter feed just to see what's happening next, because the situation is evolving and changing so rapidly, that being attentive to what your kids are drawing, with the crayons, being able to just ask them to talk through and describe what it is, that they're creating. That really play, is the way that children communicate often their emotions. And so it can be a way to get some just social emotional distance from your kid by giving them, some things to engage in. But if you are able to, if you're in the right kind of headspace, I think, to be able to be present with them and just ask them questions, right, about or point out and observe things that they're doing, to give them a chance to reflect that back. I mean, it's almost therapeutic techniques, right? But it might be really helpful during this time.
Well, let me ask you a question, Chris, because you have had children, and I don't know if they were born 2011 or not, but how would you, as a parent, communicate with your young child that's been asked to stay at home all of a sudden, who may not get the gravity of what's happening? And so, how do you explain that to them, have a conversation without causing unnecessary anxiety or harm to them about what we're going through? It is it's a grave situation.
Yeah.
How would you, as a parent, have that conversation, or suggest to parents who have children, or even for developmental needs, that may not grasp really what's happening, and
Yeah.
do that in a balanced way to be helpful to them?
Well, I mean, I think there are probably limits to what a conversation can bring, depending on the age or the developmental readiness along any kind of different, kind of vectors. It could be about somebody who's just kind of differently abled, I guess. But I think that uncertainty, I've been, one of my mantras, really, as a as a leader, as somebody who has like supervision responsibilities over others. One of the things that I guess early on became important to me in this is to try to do everything I could, if possible, to remove other uncertainty from people's lives, if I have control over it. And of course, we do with our kids. And so I think there are certain things that you would not want to say in front of or to your kids. I think I know from talking to other friends that they're not ready yet to try to brave Publix or wherever. They're just not feeling comfortable enough with that. So they're becoming a little bit insecure about how well stocked they are. Everybody's hearing about toilet paper, but that is a real thing for some people. We have an elder friend in common, by the way, who, is facing a concern like that. And so we're trying to figure out, ways. But I would not share things like that with children. I think there's certain kind of adult worries we would want to shield them from. But I think other uncertainties might seem really small. I mean, this is such a major break in routine. So, maybe creating a meal calendar, so they're not worried about, or even in the back of their minds, what are we eating next, or when are we eating? Instead, they have that there. Again, I think creating kind of a rough kind of schedule or checklist, however you want to go about it, for things that, for activities. One thing I don't think I would have known had I not studied to become a teacher is how important it is to chunk time. That even for adult learners, there's limits to how much you can focus on any one thing for any one part of time. And I think I really always loved teaching with you, because I think we did this real well. We would think, okay, if we're going to be with this group of people for 6 hours or 8 hours or 2 days through a learning exchange, what does that look like? How do you scaffold into different things? But even beyond that, how do you just break it up? So, reading is a very quiet cognitive process. If we're doing that for an hour, then how do we, then we should probably shift into some other modality. Let's play. You have a basketball hoop in your front yard. Let's do that. Let's practice yoga. There's tons of online programming kind of popping up right now. I think the use of TV and YouTube and streaming services are important. I've always been kind of a big believer that watching a film with my sons when they were younger, especially, is not a passive process. So I'm a big advocate of having a group, having the remote control on an ottoman or somewhere where anybody can grab it and pause so we can talk about a part that we're either confused about or just want to talk about. So it becomes kind of maybe a more complex social intellectual experience, but also, again, it's like it gives people an opportunity to project their feelings in a way that they don't have to identify them as my feelings. We watched an animated film the other night, and I think one of our sons, you could probably guess which one, thought that I don't think I want to watch that. I think that's like a little kids movie. And he said today, "I'm so glad that we watched that. That might have been the best animated film that I've ever had." And I felt things about my childhood I hadn't felt in a while. And he wanted to push back on the fact that we were going to watch this as a family, but we just remove the uncertainty. Like, we're watching this as a family. Make your peace with it. But some of that is an intentional way, I think, even with these older, young adults, to try to take, to try to create some loose structure, at least, to try to create, load the dice in favor of us talking more rather than less. And I think for younger kids, I think it's like being really present and not feeling like we have to have answers for things. I think the reality is that there are so many things that we don't have answers for right now. And I think it's not, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying we don't know yet, but there's a lot of smart people working on it. When are we going to go back to school? We don't know, and we're not going to know for some time, but there's a lot of people. There's so many loving educators in this community who are working as hard as they can to make the best decision that they can for your safety and for your learning. I think like all of us, young kids want to know that people have their backs. And, which kind of brings us back to Myra's point. I think I'm going to do a lot more thinking about how now do we support young people who are in homes that may not be as healthy as the ones that we grew up in, or we may have been fortunate enough to grow up in or live in now. In fact, they might even be unsafe.
Yeah.
So what are the mechanisms for a young person to communicate that they're not feeling, safe in their home, which they're now quarantined in?
I think that's where the teacher calls come in. I mean, if anyone in their microsystem is impactful in that way, it's going to be a teacher. Hopefully, a teacher that they like and respect. But that's something that if I were a principal, that would be something I would make sure that my teacher staff is doing. Make sure that you had at least one contact with your roster. During this first week of shutdown, so we're going to be here for a while, and so that's going to be important. And not to but yeah, a teacher call would be helpful. I think we're really instrumental in that case and really well suited and positioned for that, just for that. Not only to check up on them to make sure they're doing well, but if they're not doing well, also.
Yeah.
Neighbor and being a good neighbor. I mean, one thing that I really appreciate in my neighborhood is that a neighbor that lives across from us, the couple, they typed up letters and put their information, sort of just the same thing, sort of said, we're in together, we have this, we're being, told to stay at home, but here's our number, call us, text us, and we've been communicating. And that's something that, and they put the letter in everybody's mailbox. A very simple thing. It's a no contact way, a non-touch way of, keeping in contact. And so that's something too. And so doing the same thing for kids, finding, just finding ways to reach out safely, to know that they're not alone, that they can reach out to you, even if they don't respond, but at least you made the effort, and you know that they're not forgotten. So we don't want to be among the, people that are forgotten or felt forgotten. And so we want to be heard and feel known in some ways. And so this is one way to do that. So finding ways to reach out, to touch someone virtually, we tell our students. And there are many ways in which we can do that.
You began by talking about empathy, and your last question to me was about conversations or just things that you can do with young children in your home. And I would like to merge those two things. Like yesterday, Mary Beth, like I didn't know this till later, but my wife had gone for a walk with one of the boys. And what she had done ahead of time was wrote a letter to one of our neighbors down the street, who is an elder, and she lives by herself. And she held it up to the window of the door, because she was, of course, following the recommendations that we really be conscious of the proximity to vulnerable elders. But she had one of our sons with her, and I'm happy that she shared that with me, and I'm sure she shared that with our other son. But I think that would be an important thing too, to model empathy. Empathy is being able to, I think, understand and really strive to get a glimpse of another person's kind of vantage on this world. But it's also an act. I think. I think now is probably a time to think about how we operationalize love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're coming up on close to 50 minutes. Thank you for your time and helping me think through this. And I hope we can have another conversation, maybe even tomorrow.
That's fine. Yeah. One thing I would say, that as you're talking about Mary Beth's example, in that there are so many ways now that we can think about how we can reclaim a sense of agency about things too. So that's a big thing. That the sense of being out of control and vulnerability. And one of the best ways that at least I was taught years ago is to sort of reach out to other people. And so we can reclaim a sense of agency as a community, as a family, and so there are many different ways, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of get a growing list of that as we're talking, as people share what they're doing, and and share some of their experiences, and we can maybe do likewise. So be safe, but certainly we can be loving towards each other and be in community with each other in a way that sort of minimizes the sense of out of control that we have with this crisis.
So one of the things that Sophie and I use quite frequently when we're teaching or when we're working with groups and community are learning circles. And so and the way that process works for us is that we'll often have a prompt, or we'll always have a prompt. And we'll generally do this at the beginning of a convening with people, and then also at the end. And there'll be a talking piece. It'll move in always a clockwise way, one person at a time. We frame and prepare it, with new groups. But I think that I've always appreciated like kind of these last thoughts that emerge from that. So before we leave, could you talk a little bit about, in the midst of this chaos and this uncertainty and this trauma, what's been bringing you hope?
I have been really made hopeful by the acts of kindness and thoughtfulness that people have been showing, not just to me, but to each other. I mean, we've seen stories of people hoarding and being really inconsiderate in many ways, with what's happening with the stores. But on the other side, we've seen acts of kindness that was not expected, and that's been giving me a lot of hope. In that, because this is going to be a long-term thing for us, and we're projecting that. And so to see that there is goodness and there is kindness and still thoughtfulness out there, it gives me a lot of hope. And that people are responsive to that too. And so if one kind act is going to hopefully uh, uh, generate another kind act in response. And so that's a good thing.
Yeah. I've experienced probably the most hope through the limited interactions that I've had with people that previous to this, my interaction was even more limited around, So our neighborhood has changed quite a bit over the past number of years, and I realize now I haven't done a good enough job of keeping up with those changes in terms of relationships. But just yesterday, I had a long conversation with a neighbor from about 15 feet, really about what we could do systematically to ensure that other people who are living, down the block or two houses down, have the supports that they need, and if there's anything that we could do to contribute to that would be helpful. So that's encouraging. But Dr. Filibert, Dr. Sophie Filibert, thank you for your time and your friendship as always.
Looking forward to the next one. Hopefully we get to see some treasure, some treasure hunting and how we're dealing with it.
Yeah. So, again, for those of you who are able to spend some time with us today, this is our first attempt really to do what one of the things that we think we do in person really well. It's a big part of our work, both Dr. Filibert's and mine separately and then together. And that's creating opportunities and holding spaces in which people can be vulnerable and be gracious and explore how we can support ourselves, support the health in others, to support the health in our schools and organizations, and support the health in our communities. So I thank you for your time today, and we will work out a time. So we'll create a structure so there will be a set time where I hope that conversations like this with you and others can happen, at least on a every other day basis. So you're the first one. Thanks, Sophie.
All right. Y'all have a good day. Stay healthy and well.
Okay. Take care.